Hey H&K fans, James here with another video. Once again, spending a little quality time with you after hours here at our headquarters in Columbus, Georgia. And tonight doing a first. This is the first time I've done a redo or an update to a video I did many years ago on the subject of HK's LEM or Law Enforcement Modification. This is our enhanced double action only fire control system that's available with the P2000 series pistols, P30 series, HK45 series, and got its start with the venerable HK USP series. This is also one of the subjects that I think is most often misunderstood and sometimes misrepresented. People just don't seem to really understand the system or appreciate its full value. And consistent weekly questions from fans and customers about, hey, what is LEM? You know, what are the benefits of this, and what's the difference between light and heavy, and what's this I hear about this 4.1 system, and can I convert this gun to LEM or back to DSA? I aim to answer all those questions here tonight and give you, the background history like I always do. We'll run you through all the different models and variants and show you how we got to where we are today and explain those features and benefits along the way. So without further ado, why don't you follow me over here to our armory workbench and we'll dive right in. Okay, so where to begin? Well, we begin with the history lesson. Let's talk about where H&K was as a company coming out of the 1980s and into the 1990s. And specifically, we're referring to their handgun models at the time. And for this period, on the LE, the mill, and the commercial customer market, all H&K had was the P7 M series pistol. This is a P7 M13. They also had the P7 M8, and for a short period of time at the beginning of the 1990s, a 40 Smith & Wesson caliber version of it in the P7 M10. Amazing pistol. If you guys know me, you know that the P7 series is my favorite. Represents just such a unique approach to handgun design, completely out of the box. But this was an all-steel gun. It was a striker-fired gun, but with a really unique manual of arms and a gas-retarded delay system. And it was one of these kind of things where you either got it or you didn't. So you had people that completely could see how amazing this weapon was, and you saw other guys who said, I just don't understand it, and were immediate naysayers. But you can also see from how high quality this is and the materials in it, this was an extremely costly weapon to produce. And going into the beginning of the 1990s, it was anywhere from 2 to 3 times as expensive as the comparable Wonder 9 from, another competitor company. And that meant that, only the most, well-budgeted LE organizations were able to make purchases of these weapons at that time. The military wasn't going to be interested in it, and it was left to really just the success of the hardcore H&K commercial fans to carry this over. What am I getting at? I'm getting at the fact that H&K knew that they needed something new. Always focused on their military and law enforcement customers primarily. They wanted to have a new handgun that would be popular with those customer bases, and obviously the commercial customers would follow from there. What I loved about this time period from H&K that would bring us to the USP series pistol was H&K was smart enough to take a fresh look and to really do their own internal study, as well as involving the HK USA staff here to say, what is the military and law enforcement customer looking for in a handgun? And it didn't take much for them to have to reach out and look at some of those contracts that they were competing in and not winning, to be able to see trends across the board. And so what did they see? They saw the rise of the polymer framed pistols being more widely accepted. Now, H&K had obviously done the first polymer frame pistol back with the VP70, but this was now being more widely acceptable. And this was a positive thing because, as we know, the polymer constructed receivers, they are simpler to produce, and they can be done faster and with a lower cost, but still producing a great profit margin. So that's a no-brainer for the designers to incorporate that in. Next, they saw that, as awesome as the gas retarded delayed blowback operation is on a P7 series pistol, the Browning tilting barrel short recoil system was found to be not just more than adequate, it was what the majority of the customers were interested in. So that made sense too, because it is simple, it is reliable, and it is cost effective to produce. That was going to be incorporated in. They looked at things like the fact that people wanted to be able to mount lights and lasers to their pistols. And at that time, you had to either send your firearm off to some custom gunsmith and he did some kind of modification to your dust cover on your pistol in order to mount that light, or you'd have some kind of like aggressive adhesive tape that would hold it there. The USP design was the first one to incorporate an actual mounting rail that you could then mount your your light for. And they even went so far as to work with a partner company to create the universal tactical light as a system to work together with the pistol. So that worked out well in their favor. But the other thing that they looked at was to try and make one universal, as in universal self-loading pistol, modular system that would allow them to take one base gun and create multiple variants of it that would obviously allow them to meet multiple requirements. If you had customers that wanted one variant or another, H&K could respond with the same base weapon and then change out a few of the components to create a different variant and be able to respond to a different requirement. This made this weapon massively popular and have massive reach across all of these different areas. And I've got examples of them here to go through and explain the variants. Obviously, this is not meant to be a USP history lesson video, but we're going to start here. And if you want to know more information, you can go out to the channel. I've got a very detailed USP series armor operator review that goes through all of the history and models and variants there. But for this discussion, this unique, widespread adaptation of the base design was crucial. And it was really because you had so many different customers coming from so many different areas. If you recall, at this time, this late 80s, early 90s period, you had a lot of law enforcement organizations transitioning over from other semi-automatic pistols to now these Wonder 9s. You had organizations switching from revolvers over, and that meant that you might have a customer that wanted one specific feature and capability on the gun that another customer wouldn't want. And that's where, with the USP design, we had 10 different variants that were on offer. This armor cutaway model is an example of variant 1. Variant 1 was a double action, single action pistol. So you can see I've got the hammer down in a DASA mode, or I can manually cock it to a single action mode. And then I have this external multifunction lever over here. You can see in its up position, it's on safe. This prevents me from being able to fire the weapon. It also allows me to carry it either cocked and locked like a 1911 or hammer down in DASA mode. If I push it to its center position, it's on fire. And this also serves as the decocker, allowing me to safely decock the hammer and put me back in DASA mode. And when I hit the decocker and I release it, it returns the multifunction lever back to the fire position. So if I had to immediately pull the trigger and fire again, I could in DASA mode. So this variant here, with the ability to have a safety and a decocking function here on the left side for a right-handed shooter, was referred to as variant 1. This was the standard variant. This is what most of the pistols you would find if you went to your local gun shop, or what most organizations would order. We also had a variant where the safety lever was on the opposite side. So this is variant 2. Same functionality, a DASA system, but now the selector or multifunction lever is on the opposite side. You can see up for safe, down for fire, and then all the way down for decock, returning your fire. So this is your variant 2 on the right side for a left-handed shooter. This is also, you can see again, good close-up here of the universal tactical light. Pretty awesome. Okay, so those are your two initial variants, variant 1 and 2. Then we got into variant 3 and variant 4. These were single action, double action guns with a decocking lever on the side. So as you can see, here's a USP compact. This is actually one of the cool rare models in 357 SIG. You can see here I've got the hammer cocked back in single action mode, and now we can see I've got a multifunction lever on the side. But unlike the previous models where you can see the letters S and F for safe and fire, this one has no markings on here, and this is because in variant 3 you had DASA functionality, you had no safety, you only had a decocker, returning you back to double action mode. So this was meant to be carried hammer down, and you would draw, fire, and then 8-step cycle operation would cock the weapon to single action mode, and when you were done firing, you would simply hit the decocker and return to fire again. Variant 3 on the left side for right-handed shooter, variant 4 on the right side for a left-handed shooter. Then we went into variant 5. Now, variant 5 gets you into the double action only model. And this was a popular option at that time, as you can see with the hammer returning back to the forward position. The DAO model was intended for those organizations that were switching from double action revolvers, and they didn't want to have a single action only capability or a double to single action transition. They wanted their officers or their commercial customers who were familiar with having to engage a long double action trigger pull for every single shot, every single time. So when it cycles the slide for that next shot, it comes all the way back out, and you have to pull it all the way again. Heavy trigger pull, same weight as what you would have in a standard double action trigger, and the variant 5 would have a safety here on the left side, which would allow you to carry it with the weapon on safe, even with the hammer forward in DA mode. This one you can see is set up as a variant 6 where the safety is on the opposite side. So put the safety on, sweep it to fire. There is no decocking function. So if you wanted a double action only gun with the safety on, you would get either variant 5 or 6. Then we get to variant 7, our true double action only model. You can see here, this is a very early serial number 30 of the 40 Smith & Wesson line. And this one has no external safety. It only has your double action only hammer. And it has one long heavy trigger pull, just like a standard DA trigger pull on a DASA model USP. And when you would cycle the slide, it would come back out. You'd have to fire it again. So your true DAO gun was variant 7. We'll come back to this in a minute because this is where LEM will come into play next. And then we would cross over to variant 8, which actually does not exist. It was a planned variant option that was left open and has not been fulfilled. And that takes us to variant 9 and 10. And variant 9 and 10 looks like the original variant 1, where it is looks like a DASA gun. You can see here the hammer back, and it has an external multifunction lever here on safe and fire, but this does not have a decock function. This is meant in variant 9 or 10 to carry the gun in single action mode, or cocked and locked like in 1911. I'd draw the pistol, sweep the safety off, fire, the weapon would cycle, and the hammer would stay back again for follow-on shots, and when I was done firing, I would put the safety on. Variant 9 on the left for a right-handed shooter, variant 10 on the right for a left-handed shooter. So those variants are what would carry the whole USP series through its inception into the end of the 1990s. And that takes us to the next phase of this design and development into what we would know as the P2000 series pistol. You can see I've got this really cool armor or cutaway version of the P2000. Again, I've got a very detailed video review on the P2000 series, but what you will notice is if you look at a USB compact and a P2000, you can see the sizing dimensions are pretty much the same. They just rounded off some of the edges, worked on some ergonomic issues with like including a removable backstrap and making it fully ambidextrous. And that's what led to the P2000 series contract requirement. But part of that contract was wanting to have a different fire control system. They didn't want to have DASA like we do know in the traditional sense. The challenge with that has always been if you carry it hammer down, like most organizations would want them to do for safe action, you have a very long and heavy initial trigger pull. And then once the slide cycles for the 8-step cycle of operation, you transition to a shorter and lighter single action shot. And what this has always meant is that you have to really dedicate yourself to your training in order to be very proficient at that initial double action trigger pull and then those shorter follow-on shots afterwards, I should say. And what they were finding in the contracts that they were going up against other companies that were using striker-fired guns is when they would get to the actual testing portion of the weapons, though the H&K designs would run reliably and perform, to surpass all the expectations of the test requirements, the feedback they were getting from the end users was, as we've seen with all the striker-fired guns, and people who own a VP9 can attest to this, striker-fired guns are just easier to shoot with less time and effort put into them. And that was something that, it's not deniable. There's a reason why the VP9s continue to be so popular for that specific reason. H&K was not convinced that this USP design, this hammer-fire design, was wrong in any sense of the way, but they did want to be able to offer a trigger system, a fire control system that would bring it more in line with the performance of a striker-fired gun. And in that way, they wanted to be able to have the same lightened and consistent trigger pull through every single shot. So the concept was based around this new P2000 series pistol, but the developmental testing was all done on the USP series. And this is what I think is really interesting from this design was instead of just scrapping it completely and say, we're going to build a completely new gun, the engineers said, we're going to work within the confines of the real estate we already have. We're just going to redesign a few internal components, and then we'll be able to offer this in another variant that gives you that enhanced double action only performance. And then it was offered first in the USP compact, and then later as an accessory parts kit that you could purchase, which we'll showcase in a minute. And then it carried over as a standard variant in the P2000 series. For H&K, LEM, Law Enforcement Modification, as it was called here in the US, combat defensive action, as it was referred to in Germany and Europe, this actually replaced variant 7 on the USP form. So now you won't be able to get a double action only variant like we did originally in models on these with the same heavy trigger pull through all. Now you get your LEM system as well. So let's showcase what this actually looks like. Okay. Internally, it is the replacement of a few key components. And this is actually offered from H&K. You can go to our web shop and order this as a separate kit. It includes a 2-piece hammer with a standard hammer that is now Instead of having the spur, it's just bobbed on the back, kind of like the USP Compact was, to be no longer need a snag hazard. And because it's always in double action mode, you don't need to cock it back manually for a single action shot. The spur was removed, and you can see it's hollow in the center. That corresponds with this cocking piece that fits inside it. And the cocking piece has a little arm on it, and what this does is allow the hammer and the cocking piece to rotate independent of each other. This is different than what we would normally see on the standard DASA type hammer. You can see this is the spurred version again that allows me to cock it back and hold it for a single action shot. And you will notice that there are notches here that allow the hammer, when it goes to the cock position, to be held by the sear. On the LEM model, you have the cocking piece that is actually held by the sear, and it allows the hammer to move independent of it. You'll have an update to the axle, which holds the hammer in place. It is now solid all the way through, because on the variants that have a multifunction lever, it's hollowed in the center, so the multifunction lever axle can go through and fit through the other side. So that's different. On the cocking piece and hammer, you have its own rebound spring. You can see it with these little dog legs, and it sits on here on one end against the hammer, on the other end against the sear, and this gives it rebound pressure to move between the two. And then they did an update to the actual sear itself. So you have an LEM sear versus a DASA sear, and this is what is actuating against the hammer. Then you had different springs. If we look at the springs here, I'll put them on a punch so we can look closely. Okay, so now let's look at the trigger return springs that come in the LEM conversion kit. And if I didn't mention it before, the LEM conversion kit is available for the USP series pistols as well as the HK45 series pistols, because internally they use the same components. So whether you've got any of the USPs or HK45s, if you've got them in one of the other variants and you want to transition to LEM, you would buy the HK USP HK45 conversion kit that's available through our customer service or web shop. But going back to the trigger return springs that come in here, if you look on the right here, this is the light trigger return spring, and you'll notice it has narrow, more rounded coils, where the one on the left is the heavy, and it's got thicker, more squared off coils. And if I held these to the side, you would notice that the separation between both of these legs is more narrow on the light spring. It's wider on the heavy spring. And the differences between the two just means there's more resistance that has to be overcome on the heavy trigger return spring. Okay, I'll get to the weights here in a moment. Then we're going to look at the hammer springs. Each one of the conversion kits will come with 2 of these hammer springs. And unlike the trigger return springs, this is not light and heavy. This is actually standard on the left, the long one, and then the shorter one is for the HK45 compact. So when I say standard, what do I mean by that? What I mean is this is the LEM spring that you would put in any of the USP variants. So standard size, the USP compact, any of the specialty models, they would all use this, as well as the HK45. Only the HK45 compact will use this shorter model, okay? And for both of these, this is actually your heavy trigger return spring. So if you wanted to have LEM heavy, you would get your heavy trigger return spring, and then you would use your heavy hammer spring. This one for all the standard size, or all the USP variants, and the HK45, the shorter length one for your HK45 compact. If you wanted light variant, you would put in the light trigger return spring, and then you would leave in the original DASA type hammer spring that you had with the gun, okay? Why would you have a shorter length one for the HK45? Well, the issue is in how we secure the design of the hammer strut and spring. In the original USP variants, the hammer strut spring is contained within the receiver by this lanyard loop and a pin here. And this is not meant to be taken out at the user level. But when we went to the HK45 design, we created the ability to have removable back straps to change the grip size of the pistol to the individual user. And in removing the back strap, that then exposed the hammer strut and spring, and we didn't want those to come flying out of the gun when you just wanted to change out your back strap, so created this secondary captive device that holds this in. A HK45 Compact has a shorter grip than this standard gun, so the standard HK45 uses the same length hammer spring as the USP series, but the HK45 Compact has a slightly shorter one. So that's why you would see two of those in your kit. Okay, so that's your LEM light and heavy, and that's what's available for a USP or an HK45 series pistol. Then we get into your P2000 and P30 series pistols. Okay, these guns were available to be made in a slightly smaller dimension. When the USP design was a much bigger pistol overall, but they also would create an HK45 series pistol, and that would carry over to the HK45 series line. It's a slightly larger pistol. By creating one that was only for 9 and 40 in the P2000 and later P30 series line, you were able to be a little bit smaller in dimension. And then with the ergonomic changes that they would do between the models, you can see, I'll compare a USP Compact next to a P2000, you can see that the slide has been kind of contoured off. It's less blocky, it's a little rounded off. The edges around the grips are kind of contoured off. They lost a little bit of real estate in there, so they decided to minimize the size of those internal components. So they still serve the same function as what we would see with the USP series design, but they would change the dimensions of the components. So if you see here, this is USP here on my left, HK45 conversion kit, and this is an LEM hammer cocking piece and hammer axle for the P2000 P30 series pistols. So you can see they're not going to cross over because this hammer axle is too big. It won't fit in these holes and function as well. So that's the first difference. So to answer the questions from guys who are like immediately going out and say, hey, I'm going to buy that LEM conversion kit that James just mentioned to convert over my DASA P2000 series pistol, and I would tell you, well, that's not going to work because it's not designed for it. And that carries us over to the next consideration that needs to be explained here. So let's focus in on some of the unique changes that were made into the P2000 and P30. Okay, so the first primary difference between the P2000 and then later the P30 that would supersede it and the USP series that it was following after was, unlike the USP where we had a universal receiver that was completely modular and convertible to these 10 different variants, with the P2000 series, they just created two different models, two different receivers in effect. So there was a DASA variant or model gun, which was where the variant numbers change, and this is where it can get kind of confusing when you think you just understood the variant 1 through 10 on the USP, and now we introduce variant 0 through 3 really on the P2000. The DASA model was called variant 3, and it would not have an external multifunction lever safety. There was no longer an external safety lever on the gun. It would have a spurred hammer, and I'll show you a P30 example of that here, that would allow you to cock the hammer back into single action mode, or you could carry it hammer down. No external safety, but now they would maintain a decocking function, and it would move back to the rear on the left side instead of pushing down on the multifunction lever like we did on the USP to decock the weapon. Now you just put your thumb on the back of the decocking button and release it forward. and that would safely decock the weapon. This was your DASA or variant 3 version of a P2000 or P30. They also would then create a different receiver pistol, which was LEM. And as you can see, as I pull the hammer back, we have that functionality on that pistol. What you will notice is there is no decocker here on the rear of a LEM gun, because there'd be no reason that you would decock a double action only pistol. So that's the immediate way. If you were in a in a gun store looking at P2000 or P30 models and you looked at the back, if it has a decocker on the back, it's a DASA model. If it doesn't, it's an LEM model. We would also later in the P30 series create a DASA model with an external ambidextrous safety called the S models. This does not have a decocking function in the down position because the decocker has been included there. So the questions then come into play on, well, I've got a DASA, in this case P30, and I decide I don't want that anymore. I want this new LEM hotness. How do I convert my pistol over? And the answer from H&K is you don't. These are two different receivers designed for the two different pistols, because on the DASA ones, there is a cutout area or recess here on the left side of the receiver to allow for the DASA sear with its decocking button attached to it to fit in. And on the LEM guns, that cavity, that recess does not exist. So what H&K would tell you to do is, if you have a DASA P2000 or P30 series pistol and you want to convert to LEM, they would tell you to sell that pistol and go buy the LEM version of your choice. It is physically possible to convert a DASA gun to LEM if you have the components, but it will void your warranty with H&K because it is an unauthorized conversion. So I get a lot of those questions. If you own a P2000 or P30 in DASA and you want LEM, the intent is to go out and buy the LEM gun. The conversion process is not authorized, and that LEM conversion kit that I've referenced before that you see available for the USP and HK45 series, it does not exist here. What you will have are some different variants of the P2000, P30 as well. I mentioned V3 is the DASA version, and just like we had with the USP HK45 series, we also have a variant of light and heavy trigger return springs. The light one here on the right, heavy on the left. You'll notice the light one, just like before when I was showcasing your USP HK45 LEM conversion kit. The one on the right has more narrow, rounded coils. The one on the left has thicker, more kind of squared off coils. And if you look at the legs, you'll see there's a wider separation on the heavy trigger return spring on the left than there is on the one on the right. Okay, light and then heavy. Okay, these are the trigger return springs for LEM on the P30 series. And what you may notice is the length of the legs here is longer than what we had seen previously on the HK45 USP. And that the reason why is there's a longer leg on one of these ends to secure the takedown lever on the left side slide release portion on the P30 series. I covered this as a feature set on the P30 series video. If you want to go learn more about the P30 series pistols, you can find it there, but that's why they're longer. But these are your LEM ones for P30. P2000 series pistols use ones that look in the same sizing and orientation as what I showed you for HK45 and USP. Also, your hammer springs. Again, your DASA one is blue. This is also what you'd use in light LEM. Your heavy one should have this weight. A lot of guys will ask about the weight comparison. What's the difference between the two? Well, on a traditional DASA type pistol, like a USP, your single action trigger pull is going to be about 4.5 pounds. Okay, and your DA trigger pull is going to be about 11.5 pounds. So big difference there. If we go to a light LEM pistol, like this one is set up as, you're going to get about a 5.5 to 6 pound trigger pull. And if you went to a heavy LEM trigger pull, you'd have about an 8 pound trigger pull. Then we get into the question of what is LEM 4.1? And that is the addition of these three components, which are sold as a conversion kit and are available for the P2000 and P30 only. So LEM 4.1, otherwise referred to as the medium weight, is not available for USP HK45. It is a different hammer. Use the same cocking pieces as the LEM gun, but you remove the original LEM hammer, you put this one in, you remove the original catch, you put that in, and then this spring is what sits beneath the trigger bar and gives it its rebound pressure. So you replace the original one for that, and that will give you your original LEM pistol in P2000 or P30, whether it was a light or heavy. That'll give you your medium weight. I have found that it works most responsively with the heavy trigger return spring to kick that round out. So what it'll do is kind of reduce your trigger pull between that 5.5 and 8 pound weight, but it also give you kind of a shorter, more responsive reset to your trigger if you're looking for those upgrades. Now let's talk about how LEM functions, what some of those features and benefits may be. Okay, so let's start out here with this HK45 compact. You can see I've removed the rear grip panel to expose the hammer strut and spring here. And you can see this has the external multifunction lever to allow me to cock it and decock it. In a traditional DASA pistol like this, you have the ability to carry it either hammer down in DASA mode or hammer back or cocked with the safety on in single action mode. Obviously very versatile, okay? It also would give you the decocking function here. So the intent would be that you would carry it either safety on or safety off, most likely hammer down. You would draw, and then you would pull back one long heavy trigger pull, then to release the hammer. When this is happening, as the trigger is being pulled back the rear, you can see the hammer moving. The hammer is cocking the hammer strut, and which compresses that hammer spring. In the double action mode, as soon as it is cocked, it is released from the sear and it flies forward and fires a weapon. So that double action, the action of actually cocking the hammer strut and spring and then releasing the hammer from the sear in one consistent motion, that's your double action. Your single action is where you manually cock the hammer, or the slide cycling in the 8-step cycle operation cocks the hammer, strut, and spring, and all you're having to do at that point is just release the hammer from the sear. That's your single action mode. The challenge with these weapons, as I mentioned before, is you have to get really good at this long, heavy trigger pull, and then after the first shot, now cycling back to a shorter trigger pull. And most shooters, without a lot of training experience, will end up pulling the gun, off target on that initial trigger pull, and then have a hard time getting back on there again. And in many gunfights, when you may not be shooting more than a couple of rounds, not hitting the target on your first time, that can be a big problem. So you can get around that by really practicing and learning to enjoy shooting. And I've found that I am a much better shooter, and I transition over to being able to shoot other pistols really well when I really focus on DASA. But there's no question that having a lighter, consistent trigger pull for every shot will make you be able to shoot easier with less time and effort, and that's where LEM comes into play. With LEM, as you can see on this P30, I've removed the back strap so it exposes the hammer strut and spring. And when I either load the weapon the first time and cycle the slide to the rear to manually put a round in the chamber, or when I pull the trigger and fire and the 8-step cycle of operation takes over, each time what happens is the hammer being cocked back in that action will pre-cock the hammer strut and spring. And again, as I mentioned with that 2-piece hammer and cocking piece, now the hammer is able to move freely while the cocking piece is locked against the sear. And it is not until I take up the slack, I still have the same length of a double action trigger pull, but now I have much less resistance because I'm not having to compress the hammer, strut, and spring. I'm just having to take out the resistance of the trigger return spring itself. I get to the wall, and then the hammer releases the sear, the weapon fires, and again, same lightened, shortened trigger pull at this point like it would be for a single action pistol. When I'm done firing, it would release. So that as itself is an advantage. The next advantage on this is if for some reason the weapon failed to fire, you had some light primer strike or some kind of defective problem with the round that's in the chamber. With an LEM gun, if I pull the trigger the first time and for whatever reason it doesn't go off, I can simply let the trigger out and then pull the trigger a second time. In this case, because the slide didn't cycle, it did not pre-cock the hammer, strut, and spring, but it still allows me to pull the trigger and have the hammer fall again. In this second shot, when the slide is not cycled, it will be the long, heavy double action trigger pull that you expect because you're having at that point to pre-cock the hammer, strut, and spring and then release it, but it at least gives you what we call a second strike capability. And this is beneficial because, in a striker fired pistol, if that round doesn't go off on the first time, the striker went forward. The only way to get it to fire again is to manually cycle the slide back to the rear to re-engage the striker and then take the next shot. Some people will see that as an advantage because they say, well, James, if I didn't have some kind of ammo-related malfunction, I don't want to waste time trying to make that round go off again. I want to get rid of that possibly bad round, get a good round in the chamber and fire again. So I'm going to be a guy who's going to tap, rack, bang. And, I really don't have a problem with that except in the situations where you just don't have the time or the second hand to manually do that. Maybe you're having to fire from compressed. Maybe you're pushing somebody off and it didn't go off the first time. My ability to just very rapidly pull the trigger a second time for a second strike capability without having to rack the slide, that might be exactly what I need. So that's another unique advantage of LEM and how the system functions. Okay, so let me now wrap up this video and kind of give you my summary on one other really kind of unique feature about LEM. And for this one, it really applies for me to the USP series, but it could go for the HK45 series as well. Some of you guys, your introduction into HK handguns was with the USP series. I know it was for me. I got my first USP for Christmas, 1993, and it was a Variant 1 DASA. That was what was available in the store when my dad went to pick it up, and that was very common of the time variant for this pistol. But through the years, that same USP, because of the modularity of the system, I've converted that to just about every variant on the list because my personal tastes and desires changed through the years, all the way to including up to being able to convert this to LEM so that it can simulate more consistently with the other striker-fired guns that I'm spending more time shooting more recently. That in itself, I think, is a great advantage because you can, if you're just getting into HK pistols, go into a gun shop and find a USP variant or maybe an HK45 variant that's a DASA model that's just sitting there on the shelf because guys aren't as excited about hammer-fired guns anymore, and you can get yourself a smoking deal on one of these or maybe an LE trade-in gun. And now that you understand LEM and how you can convert these pistols over, drop that kit in there, and now you've got a very cost-effective entry into the HK market with a really cool fire control system that brings it back up to pace with where you would be otherwise buying a brand new striker fired gun from somebody else. Maybe you've got a passed down USP or HK45 pistol from somebody in your family or a friend, and now you're able to give it some extra legs and get more enjoyment out of it because of the modularity and specifically the LEM system. And even though, I like to carry a cocked and locked P30 and run it like I used to run 1911s, there is a massive advantage to LEM system of not having to worry about defeating an external safety before I drive. I present my weapon up, and just like I do on a striker fired gun, when my sights are aligned on the target, I press the trigger back to the rear, and I get the same consistent light and trigger pull for every single shot. It really is hard to beat that performance capability on an LEM style pistol. So whether you choose a USP, an HK45, a P2000, or P30, one of the great things about H&K is all of the options that we've got for you. We've got you covered, and I hope that you feel a little more informed about the different models, the variants, and specifically the features and benefits and capabilities that LEM present to you. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. You learned something here today, and you can come away with a greater appreciation for HK's LEM system. And I really hope that you'll use this as a tool to share the knowledge. So if you have a friend out there who's interested in H&K handguns and they've got questions about LEM, please just share this video with them. I think it'll really help dispel some of the misrepresentation that's out there and showcase the unique features that this system has. So as always, I look forward to bringing you guys more videos in the future. Till next time, take care.